Okay, moving on. We've already gone through our DAOs and we've looked at how those were put together using the Appfuse way. We have our managers. We have Spring wired up to inject our DAO into our manager and then to inject our manager into our action class. Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at the JSPs and the struts config and how we've actually wired this into JQuery. Okay, so the Appfuse way is basically you end up you build two JSPs. You have a lister and a form, an edit form, and of course you have an action class and a struts2 class or a struts2 config. Now, if you know struts2, you can pretty much do anything you want, but if you were to generate one using Appfuse CRUD Builder, this is basically what you would get. Okay, and of course when we actually get to where we're looking at the App Manager application in itself, you'll see where we've kind of deviated slightly from that scheme. So, but right now, again, we're just trying to keep this very simple. Okay, so here we have our person list, struts2 definition. Now, we're not doing anything here. You notice we're not calling a class, we're not calling a method. Basically, all we're doing is pulling up the person list JSP, which is here. Okay, now, the thing about JQuery is it's very JSON-y. Okay, so if you looked at the original struts way, this would actually call the person action and it would call the list method in that action, and those results would be sent back to display tag. Well, that's not what we're doing here. The JQuery grid is going to be populated with a JSON call. So essentially we've changed the Appfuse way from the list page actually running the action class and calling the list to where the page is actually making a JSON call to the same method and getting the list back in a JSON format. Okay, so the other thing we're doing here is when we edit a record from the grid, we're sending back the edit method in the person action. Okay, and then when you click save on the edit form, we're actually calling the save method in the action class. Okay, so these come back externally there. Now, in order to run JSON and use the JSON plugin in struts2, basically what we do is we create another package and we give it a name JSON, and it's extending the JSON default that's built into struts, and we gave it our own namespace. So from our web app, we're let's say localhost 8080 Appfuse 210 /JSON would consist of all of these methods here, these actions. Okay, so down at the bottom we have our person example. Okay, so here's our person list, like I said. So inside the person list page, we're going to be making a call to /JSON/personList.html, which is going to run our person action list method. Okay, except like I said, it's not doing the Appfuse way in that it's doing it pre-loading of the page. We're doing it actually, JQuery is going to make this call for us. So we're telling struts2 that we want a JSON result type. Okay, and we're going to specifically define the properties in our action class that we want. We don't want every getter to return everything in our action class for this. We just want the values needed to do the result set and the paging. That's all we want to do. This keeps the data down to just the minimum requirement here. Okay, so if we go look now at our list page, let's take a look. Okay, now here I guess we should go look at let's see. Okay, so like I said, we're using the site mesh templating engine here. So our main default page is going to be here. Okay, and you see how we wire in JQuery plugin is we use this tag, this head tag here, and we turn on our JQuery UI, and we're using the Redmond theme. There's a bunch of default built-in themes you can use, and we're using the Redmond theme. If you go and look at the showcase at the JQuery plugin, it'll demonstrate all the different themes you can use. I mean, this is really slick. I'm not even covering a third of what this thing can do. So, but this is how you would wire it in to the site mesh templating engine here. So and then site mesh basically pulls in all of these common places. One of the other things we're pulling in is our common tag libs. Okay, and here is where we're setting up our Struts2 JQuery tags here. So we're using the Struts2 JQuery base tags and the Struts2 JQuery grid tags. Okay, along with all the stuff. Now Appfuse, all of this comes with Appfuse as is right here, except for these two which I added. Okay, and the documentation at the JQuery grid site pretty much tells you how to set these up. But again, you'll be able to download this app from my website here, and you'll have all this stuff pre-wired and ready to go. So I mean, I'm not trying to teach JQuery here. I'm just, you know, showing you how I wired it up, how I got it working, and how I avoided some of the pitfalls of using it. Okay, so that's how we wired it into our tags and our application here. Okay, so now let's go take a look at the tags themselves. So the grid that we're using is going to be a list of person models, pretty much. Okay, so we have our so we're going to use the Struts2 tags to define a URL variable. Okay, here's our grid edit person. Okay, and here's our person list. Okay, so when we edit a person in the grid and we click save, we're calling this JSON method to actually do the save of the grid from the edit form. We'll see that as when we run the demo app. Okay, and the remote URL, this is where we're actually getting our list data from. Okay, so it's running the JSON list. Now if we go look at our action class, here's the list method here, and this is what's actually getting run when the page loads. And you see here what we're doing is we're setting up our JQuery pager, and we're calling into our pager factory to get a JQuery pager from our factory, and we're passing it in the HTTP request. So the factory is going to build a pager based on the request parameters that are required by JQuery. Okay, so once we get our request back, we are then going to call our get person criteria, okay, which is basically passing in just our page request, and that guy is going to in turn call into our generic DAO, which we've enhanced, and so this is going to front end it in a way that's just going to pass in our model name. So this, you know, it's a little bit more generic here, and then when we actually get into the DAO hibernate for this class, for the person manager, it's going to pull in the actual query data, build the criteria, run the query, and give us back a result set of our persons. Okay, then we're going to just set up some fields here that the pager is going to need. Of course, the list of persons, the number of records, and a total page size. Okay, so because it needs to know those things in order to paginate the list. So of course, when we run the query here, we're going to get back the full list in this case, because we haven't specified any search criteria or anything. So we're going to get a full list back with the total number of records in the entire list, and then based on the page size, the total number of pages in the list, so we can build the little pager at the bottom. Okay, and then we're going to log all these variables so we can see what's going on in case we run into any problems. Okay, so that pretty much makes up our pager. Okay, so if we go back, here's our generic. Let's take a look at this again. So here's our generic DAO once again, and here's what it's calling in. Okay, this is the generic criteria pager, so it just runs a query based on the model that we pass in. And if we look at more specifically at our person DAO hibernate, you see that the create person criteria takes the JQuery pager, right, sets a default sort criteria up, calls the app manager criteria, passing in the person class and our current paginated list that we got here, right? And then what we do there is we return two different things. We return a list of the records we found based on the criteria, and then the count that we've got based on that criteria, including any searching and narrowing down that was done. So instead of returning just a list, we're returning a hash map with the two values, the list and the count. And then we basically set these values up in our paginated list. We set the total number of rows based on the count, and then we just send back the list to our action class, and then it knows which variables it needs to have as variables that it's going to pass into the page itself, and those in this case being the actual list, the total number of records, and the total number of records that are for each page. Okay, so that's pretty much how we're doing this. Okay, so in the next video, I think what we'll do now is we'll actually run the app and see what it looks like. See y'all.